My family only truly saw me the moment they saw the number $12 million on the screen. My name is Emily Carter, and everything happened on a Thanksgiving evening, a dinner that was supposed to feel warm, familiar, and safe. The laughter was there, the old stories were being told again. Everything looked normal, almost too normal. And me, I was, where I always was sitting at the table, present, but never truly part of it, until my sister walked in, holding my laptop. She smiled, a soft smile, almost harmless, if you didn't look long enough. Hey, does anyone want to see what Emily's actually been up to? I didn't have time to stand, didn't have time to say a word. She had already turned the screen toward the table. And then everything went silent. No one spoke. No one moved. The air thickened, like all the oxygen had just been pulled out of the room. Every pair of eyes locked onto one number $12.4 million. I looked at them, not at the number, but at their reactions. My mother didn't look at me. She looked at the number. My father tightened his grip on his wine glass, like he was calculating something in his head. And my sister, she started crying, but not from shock, not from pride, because she believed that money should have been hers. And then the first words were spoken, not, "How did you do this?" Not, "We're proud of you," but, "Family is supposed to share. Your sister deserves it more. You owe this family." In that exact moment, something inside me kind went quiet. Not anger, not the kind of pain you'd expect, but something colder, clearer, like a truth I had always known, had finally been spoken out loud, that I was never what they cared about, only what I had. And trust me, nothing wakes you up faster than realizing you never really had a family to begin with. If you've ever felt invisible, overlooked, or only remembered when you had something to offer, stay with this story. And tell me honestly in the comments, what's worse, being abandoned by your family or having them come back only when you have money? Hit subscribe because the next part gets even worse. And if you think this all started with $12 million, it didn't. It started when I was young enough to believe that family was the safest place in the world and old enough to realize that might not be true. Before Rachel came into my life, everything was simple. I was an only child, no comparisons, no distance. My mom helped me with homework. My dad sometimes took me fishing. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to make me believe I belonged. Then one night, everything changed. I was woken up around 2 a.m. Aunt Kelly stood at the door, her voice urgent, telling me to pack because my mom was at the hospital. Rachel had been born premature, too small, too fragile, lying inside an incubator with wires connected everywhere. I stood there, looking at her from a distance. I wasn't allowed to touch, wasn't allowed to get close, only allowed to look like she was something so delicate that even my presence might break her. Maybe that was the moment an invisible line was drawn. When Rachel came home, nothing was the same. The house became cold sterile in an almost obsessive way. The smell of disinfectant filled every corner. Everything revolved around keeping Rachel safe. And in that system, I was no longer a child. I was a risk. If I coughed, I had to leave. If I sneezed, my suitcase was already packed. There was one time I had a mild fever. Nothing serious. But my mom still called my grandmother to pick me up in the middle of the night. I stood at the door, holding my backpack, watching them close it behind me. No one hugged me. No one said, "You'll be okay." The door shut, and for the first time, I understood I wasn't the one they needed to keep. At first, I told myself it was because they cared. My grandmother baked for me. My aunt gave me books. But you can't lie to yourself forever. Children don't learn the truth from words They learn it from how they're treated. I wasn't sent away to be loved more. I was sent away so I wouldn't be a problem. Do you know what that feels like? When you start to believe that just existing is something that needs to be fixed. I started to change. I studied harder, spoke less, became more careful in every small movement, as if I was easy enough, they might keep me around a little longer. But nothing changed. In the same house, one child was kept and one child learned how to leave. Rachel needed to be protected. And me, I needed to be understanding. That sentence was repeated so many times. It stopped being an explanation. It became a definition of who I was. Not a daughter, not the center of anyone's world, just the one who had to step back. The one who disappeared when necessary so everything could stay peaceful. Some nights, I would lie there staring at the ceiling, wondering if one day I just didn't come back, would anyone notice? Or would the house simply become quieter? It sounds heavy, but the truth is, neglect is rarely loud, it's quiet. It lives in the moments when no one calls your name, no one asks you a question, no one looks up when you walk into the room. And eventually, you stop asking, why don't they love me? You start asking, was I ever enough to be loved at all? Looking back, I think maybe it all started with fear. Fear of losing Rachel, fear of the worst possible outcome. But that fear grew. It took over everything, and slowly it pushed me out. Not through one clear decision, but through hundreds of small moments no one noticed. And that's how I grew up. Inside my own home, but always feeling like someone who was never meant to stay. If the last part was when I learned how to leave, this part was when I learned how to disappear. Not disappear from that house, but disappear within my own life, in a way no one would notice missing. I started doing everything right. Top of my class. Almost perfect test scores. Teachers said my name with unmistakable pride. There were days I held a certificate in my hands, my heart beating just a little faster. Because of one small thought, maybe this time, they'll see me. But when I brought it home, nothing changed. My mother glanced at it, nodded, then went back to Rachel's schedule. My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. No questions. No hug. Not a single moment that made me feel like it mattered. One time, I placed my certificate right in the center of the dinner table. No one said anything. That night, I found it buried under a pile of ads like it had never existed. I stood there for a long time, then told myself, maybe it's just not enough. So I tried harder. I entered a science competition, stayed up late, reworking every detail until everything felt perfect. When they called my name for first place, I stood on that stage, looking out at a crowded room, and still, instinctively searched for a familiar face. There was no one there. No seat safe for me. No one clapping for me. 2 weeks later, the whole family showed up for Rachel's 5-minute flute recital. I sat in the back, watching them smile, record videos, cheer, like it was the most important moment in the world. And for the first time, I didn't ask, why didn't they come for me? I asked, what did I do wrong? Questions like that never come with clear answers. And over time, they turn into something else, a quiet doubt that follows you every day. Am I actually good or just lucky? Do I deserve praise? Or are people just being polite? I started shrinking myself, doing better, faster, more perfectly. But not because I believed I could, because I hoped if I was good enough, they wouldn't be able to ignore me anymore. But they still did. Rachel was different. She didn't have to try as hard. A decent grade was enough to be praised. A small achievement was enough to bring everyone together. My mom would retell every detail. My dad would listen. In the same house, one child was seen, and one child learned how to become invisible. Slowly, I stopped bringing things home, stopped talking about school, stopped hoping for reactions I had been waiting for far too long. But there was one thing I never stopped wanting to be seen. Just once. One real look. One simple sentence. We see you. If you've ever stood in a room full of familiar faces and still felt like you didn't exist, then you understand what that feels like. It doesn't go away, it just changes shape. It becomes motivation pushing you further. But at the same time, it becomes a wound reminding you that no matter how well you do, there are places where you will never be chosen. And then one day, I realized this. It wasn't that I wasn't good enough, it wasn't that I was missing something. It was just that I was never the one being chosen, not the center, not the priority, not the story they wanted to tell. Just a name, somewhere in the background, close enough to be present, but never important enough to be seen. And when I understood that, I stopped trying to make them see me. Because if they never chose me, then at least this time I would choose myself. And when I say I would choose myself, it wasn't some inspirational moment. There was no music, no applause. Just a quiet decision repeated every day. In small ways no one noticed. I stopped waiting, stopped hoping someone would show me the way. If no one helped me study, I taught myself. If no one asked what I needed, I found a way to get it. Everything started in long evenings in my room, just me, a desk, and stacks of books taller than my arms. I no longer studied to be praised. I studied so I wouldn't need anyone. There's a clear difference between those two things. One is expectation. The other is control. And I chose control. I planned every week, every subject, every small goal. I wrote everything down. I corrected my mistakes like it was the only responsibility I had. No one reminded me to do homework. No one checked if I had finished studying. And no one was there if I failed. There were nights I studied until 2 a.m., not because I wanted to be better than anyone else, but because I knew if I stopped, no one would continue for me. It sounds strong, but really, I was just learning how to survive. When you understand that no one is coming, you stop waiting. And when you stop waiting, you start moving forward. I joined everything I could control: clubs, debate team, academic competitions, not to build a perfect resume, but because those were the only places where I had a voice. On the debate stage, no one cared who I was in my family. They only cared about what I said. And for the first time, that was enough. I started to realize where I was good. Not because someone told me, but because I saw it myself. On the nights before exams, I sat alone, reading the material over and over until my eyes blurred. No one encouraged me, no one told me to rest. But no one distracted me either. Just me and my goal. Slowly, I changed. It wasn't the obvious sadness anymore, not the why questions. Instead, it became a silence, stronger, colder. I learned to put my emotions aside and focus on what I could control. It wasn't that I stopped feeling. I just stopped letting it control me. I became more efficient, but also more alone. While others worried about being accepted, I only cared about finishing the goal. While they searched for recognition, I learned how to evaluate myself. You don't become strong because you want to. You become strong because you don't have another choice. The SAT was coming up. I didn't tell anyone in my family. Not because I wanted to keep it a secret, but because I knew the result wouldn't change anything. To them, I would still be the one on the sidelines. But to me, it was another test. Not to prove anything to them, but to prove to myself that all those nights alone meant something. The day the results came in, I sat in front of the screen for a long time. 1,600. A perfect score. A number most people only ever hear about. I looked at it, didn't smile, didn't scream, didn't call anyone, just let out a long breath, as if I had just confirmed something I had always known, that if I did everything on my own, I could actually do it. I didn't print the result. I didn't bring it home. I didn't tell my parents. I folded it up and put it in my drawer, like a secret that belonged only to me. Because by then, I understood there are victories that don't need witnesses. And there are versions of you that only exist when no one is watching. I was no longer the little girl standing at the door waiting for someone to call me back. I had become the person who opens the door for herself. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone to call me back anymore. And when I no longer needed anyone to call me back, that was when I started preparing to leave. Not in an impulsive way, and not to prove anything to them. It was a quiet plan built step by step, just like the way I had learned to survive all those years. I figured everything out about college on my own. I read, I asked, I filled out every application myself. No one sat beside me to guide me. No one asked if I had submitted anything yet. I wrote every essay alone, during the same long evenings I used to spend studying. The only difference was this time, I wasn't studying to get good grades. I was studying to get out. There were moments when I paused, staring at the screen, wondering if I really left, would anyone notice? Or would everything just continue the same, only quieter, without someone who was never truly seen? But I kept going. I applied to schools I once only dared to read about. I researched scholarships, filled in every financial form, sent every email myself. No one knew. No one needed to know. Because by then, I understood there are journeys you have to walk alone if you want them to truly belong to you. The response letters started arriving. I opened them by myself. No one sat next to me. No one waited for the results. Some were rejections. I read them, folded them, and moved on. Some were acceptances. I did the same. No celebration. No one to share it with. Until the day I received the letter I had been waiting for. A full scholarship, tuition, housing, books. Everything was covered. I read every line slowly. Not because I didn't understand, but because I needed to be sure it was real. That this wasn't a mistake. That this time, a door was truly opening in front of me. And then, for the first time in years, I felt something lift. Not excitement, not loud happiness. Just a quiet sense of relief, like something inside me had finally been released. A weight I had been carrying for far too long. I wasn't stuck anymore. I could leave. But the strange thing was, at the same time, there was a deep sadness I couldn't quite name. Not because I didn't want to leave, but because I realized I had always hoped I wouldn't have to do it alone. I used to think maybe one day they would look at me and say, "You don't have to go that far just to be seen." But that day never came. That night, I sat at the dinner table with my family like always. Rachel was talking about a school activity. My mom listened. My dad nodded. No one asked me anything. No one noticed that I was holding a ticket that could change my entire life. And I said nothing. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I knew it wouldn't change the way they saw me. I put the letter in my room, placed it in the drawer along with all the other achievements no one had ever asked about. But this time, it was different because this wasn't just an achievement, this was an exit. The days after that passed in a strangely normal way. I still ate with them, still sat in the same place, still stayed quiet when needed. But inside, everything had changed. I wasn't staying because of hope anymore. I was staying because I was preparing to leave. The day I officially accepted the offer, I didn't celebrate. I didn't take photos. I didn't post anything. I just sat there alone, looking back at everything I had done and let out a long breath. Not because I was tired, but because I finally understood the first success of my life wasn't a score. It wasn't a scholarship. It was that I had opened a door for myself and had the courage to walk through it. And when I stepped through that door, I didn't walk into a perfect life. I walked into a place where no one knew who I was, and for the first time, that made me feel lighter. No history, no comparisons, no shadow following me, just me and what I was capable of. After graduating, I took a job at an auction house in Detroit. It wasn't a big position, nothing glamorous. My work was simple recording, sorting, cataloging items that people left behind after they passed away. Most of it was ordinary old tea sets, scratched furniture, pieces of jewelry labeled costume. But to me, something felt different. Maybe it came from the years I spent at my grandmother's house when I would sit for hours just organizing old jewelry no one cared about. I didn't know why I liked it. It was just that every engraving, every tiny detail made me pause longer than most people. Like those objects were trying to say something, just not everyone had the patience to listen. And then one day, I saw it. A small brooch sitting among a box of jewelry labeled fake. Nothing stood out. It wasn't shiny. It didn't catch the eye. But something felt off. The weight, the craftsmanship, a small detail in the clasp that, if you didn't look long enough, you'd miss. I could have ignored it. And for a few seconds, I almost did. I stood there, holding it in my hand, wondering, was I imagining things? Was I just trying to see something no one else saw? Because if I was wrong, then it was just a meaningless object, exactly like everyone said. But if I was right, I didn't put it down. I took it home, and for the next few nights, I almost lived with it. I read until my head hurt, compared until my eyes blurred. Every small mark, every symbol, every detail, I checked them all again. No one asked me to do it. No one paid me extra for it. But for the first time, I didn't want to miss something that could be mine. There were moments I stopped, looked at what I had found, and felt doubt creeping in. What if it was all a mistake? What if I was just fooling myself? But this time, I didn't step back. 2 weeks later, I brought it to my manager. I didn't claim certainty. I just said there was a possibility we had misjudged it. He looked at me, then at the object, with clear disbelief. That didn't surprise me. I was used to not being believed. But this time, I didn't stay quiet. I laid out every piece of evidence, every detail, every reason I couldn't ignore it. And then he started to listen, not politely, but really listen. The brooch was later confirmed to be a rare piece from a collection dating back to the 1920s. It was sold for over $47,000. But the important part wasn't the money. It was what came after. When he looked at me and said, "Good job," just 3 words. But I stood there, unable to react right away. Not because I didn't understand, but because I had never heard those words in that way. Not because someone needed to encourage me, but because they truly believed in what I had done. Not because of who I was, but because I was right. Before, I had to try to be seen. Now, I just had to see clearly. From that day on, things began to change. not in a dramatic way. But little by little, I was given more items to evaluate, asked for my opinion, trusted. And each time, something inside me grew slowly but steadily. Confidence, not the loud kind, not the kind that needs validation from others, but something much quieter, a sense that I know what I'm doing. I began to study antique jewelry more deeply. I taught myself about designers, hallmarks, historical periods. I took notes, compared, analyzed. No one asked me to do it. But I didn't need anyone to ask anymore. Because for the first time, what I was good at was exactly what others overlooked. The things once considered meaningless tiny details, old objects, the things no one paid attention to, became my greatest advantage. And then I realized something value doesn't come from whether something is noticed or not. It comes from whether someone has the patience to truly see it. This time, I wasn't the one waiting to be seen anymore. I was the one who sees. And maybe the most important part wasn't that I had discovered something worth $47,000. It was that for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone to confirm my value because I could already see it myself. And when I no longer needed anyone to validate my worth, that's when a thought began to form small but persistent. If I could do this for others, why not do it for myself? At first, it was just a passing idea, something too big to consider, too risky to begin. I had a stable job, a position that was slowly being recognized. I could have stayed on that path, safe, steady, without needing to prove myself all over again. But there are things that once you've seen them, you can't pretend you haven't. I started working on the side, taking small authentication requests from private collectors. Evenings, weekends, no office, no reputation, just me, and the objects people weren't sure about. At first, everything was slow. There were weeks when the phone didn't ring, no emails, no clients. I sat in a small room, staring at my expenses rent, equipment, the savings slowly running out. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a very real kind of fear. Not the old kind of pain, but the pressure of possibly failing. There were nights I woke up at 3 a.m. just to calculate how much time I had left before I'd have to give up. I stared at the ceiling just like before, but this time, the question wasn't why don't they see me? It was, am I going the wrong way? But the next morning, I still went back to my desk. Not because I was certain, but because I didn't want to go back to who I used to be, the person who waited for others to decide her worth. Little by little, things began to change. A client came back. Another referred someone new. An item was authenticated correctly. A payment arrived right when I needed it most. Not big leaps, just small steps, but steady ones. And then there was one project that changed everything. A large collection. Hundreds of items. Many of them misclassified. I worked almost nonstop for 2 weeks. Ate quickly. Slept little. My mind constantly spinning with details, markings, history. The pressure was so intense I could barely feel anything else. But underneath it all, there was something that kept me going hope. The hope that this time, everything I had built would be enough. When the project ended, I didn't expect anything big. But the client's reaction was unlike anything I had experienced. They weren't just satisfied, they trusted me, and they started talking about me to others. From that point on, things didn't move slowly anymore. More work came in, bigger clients, higher value contracts. I went from working alone to someone who had to learn how to build a system, hiring people, expanding, making decisions. And for the first time, I looked at my bank account and saw numbers I had never imagined before, not just once, but repeatedly. I didn't celebrate. I didn't tell anyone. I just sat there, looking at those numbers, and thinking about the nights at 3 a.m. when I wasn't sure I could keep going. The feeling wasn't explosive joy, it was something deeper, a kind of calm, a quiet sense of pride. Like I had just proven something to myself that all the small steps, the silent days, the moments when no one was watching weren't meaningless at all. Success doesn't come from a single moment. It comes from what you do when no one is there to see it. And when I look back at the path I had taken, I no longer saw a girl who had been overlooked by her family. I saw someone who had learned how to build everything from zero and didn't need anyone's permission to do it. And when I no longer needed permission just to exist, I no longer needed to explain who I was, not to the world, but to my own family. There's something strange that happens when you change, but the people around you don't. They still see you as the version they're used to. And sometimes, instead of correcting that, you let it stay. I didn't tell them about my work, not about the major contracts, not about the numbers I once couldn't imagine. When my mom asked, I kept it simple. I'm still working at the same place. When my dad asked, I said, it's fine. And that was enough. In their eyes, I was still the daughter with a normal job, nothing special, nothing worth noticing. And maybe part of me didn't want to change that because when they don't expect anything, I don't have to explain anything. Sunday dinners went on like they always had. I sat in the same seat, listened to Rachel talk about her work, her life, the things everyone was always ready to hear. My mom nodded. My dad asked questions. The atmosphere was warm in the way I had always known warm, but not for me. And I sat there quietly. Only one thing was different this time. I wasn't waiting to be seen anymore. There were moments when I found it almost ironic, not funny in a joyful way, but a quiet, subtle kind of irony, like I was watching a play I used to be the main character in, but now I was just observing from the outside. Rachel talked about saving money. My mom worried about expenses. My dad mentioned bills that needed to be paid. And no one knew that I had just signed a contract worth more than everything they were worrying about combined. I said nothing, not because I wanted to keep it a secret for a surprise, but because I understood if I said it, it wouldn't change the way they saw me. Or worse, it might change for reasons I didn't want. Instead, I chose a different way. Every month, money was transferred into my parents' account. No name, no explanation, just numbers. When they asked, I said I was saving and helping a little. They believed me. Or maybe they didn't want to ask too deeply, and that was enough. There were moments I looked at my phone, saw the transfer confirmation, and felt something hard to describe. Not pride, not happiness, but a quiet bitterness. The one who was once seen as a burden was now the one carrying most of everything, but no one knew. And I didn't need them to. It might sound contradictory, but to me, helping them wasn't about recognition. It was a way to close a part of the past in a way only I could understand. I didn't do it because they had treated me well. I did it because I didn't want to become them. The years of being overlooked taught me many things, but maybe the most important one is this. You can choose how you respond. You can hold on to the bitterness, or you can let it go. I'm not perfect. I still remember. There are still moments that hurt, but this time, I don't let those feelings control me anymore. I control them. In the same room, I'm still the least noticed person, but I'm no longer the weakest. In the same story, they still think they understand me, but this time, I'm the one who understands everything most clearly. And maybe the most ironic thing isn't that they have no idea how much I've changed. It's that the one they once overlooked is the one quietly holding everything together. And maybe I could have kept things that way forever if it hadn't been for that day. An ordinary evening, a familiar dinner, conversations so repetitive you could predict every next line. I sat in my usual place, listening like always, keeping everything at just the right distance, not too close, not too far, until Rachel walked into the room. Hey, can I borrow your laptop charger? I nodded. Didn't think much of it. Just a small request, like hundreds of times before. I handed it to her, then went back to the table. Everything felt normal for the first few minutes. Then I heard her voice from the other room. What is this? It was a quiet sentence, but something in the way it sounded made me stand up. I walked into the room and saw Rachel standing there, still holding my laptop, her eyes locked on the screen. I knew exactly what had happened, not because I saw what was on the screen, but because I saw her reaction, surprise, then doubt, then something else. This is yours? I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because part of me already knew what would happen next. Rachel didn't wait for an answer. She turned and carried the laptop into the living room where the whole family was still sitting. You all need to see this. Everything that followed happened fast. The laptop was placed in the middle of the table. The screen still open. The numbers still there clear, undeniable. Douze dollars. Catch million. No one spoke for the first few seconds. The air in the room felt frozen. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then my mother laughed. A short, disbelieving laugh. Stop joking. But no one else laughed. My father leaned closer, as if looking harder would make the number disappear. Rachel stood still, her eyes fixed on the screen. And then everything broke? Not with a shout, but with a question. Where did you get this money? No. Congratulations. No, we're proud of you. Just suspicion. I stood there, looking at each of them, waiting for even one different reaction, one moment where they looked at me, not the number. But it never came. Instead, family is supposed to share. Your sister is still struggling. You can't keep all of that to yourself. I don't remember who said what first. I only remember how it felt a shock, but not because they knew the truth. Because I realized I had hoped for the wrong thing. I thought maybe if they knew what I had done, they would see me differently. But no, they didn't see me. They saw the money. The anger came quickly. Not loud, not explosive, just a heat, spreading slowly through my chest, like everything I had held in for years had finally found a way out. So, that's the first thing you think about? No one answered. But I didn't need them to, because the answer was already there, in their eyes, in their voices, in the way they looked at me like something that could be divided. Not a person, but an opportunity. And that was the moment I completely broke out of the illusion. Not about money, not about success, but about family. I thought if I was good enough, strong enough, successful enough, things would change. But the truth is, success doesn't change people. It just reveals who they are. I stood there in the house I grew up in, and for the first time, I didn't feel sad. Just a cold kind of clarity. Like all the pieces I had tried to ignore had finally fallen into place. And this time, I had nothing left to hope for. And when I stopped hoping they would change, that room suddenly became louder than ever. Not because anyone was shouting, but because everything they had kept inside was finally being said out loud. My mother started. Her voice wasn't raised, but it was sharp. You can't keep all that money to yourself. My father didn't look at me. He looked at the screen, then said slowly, "The family raised you. You owe us." Rachel stood beside him, tears still on her face, but her eyes had changed. No longer surprised, no longer confused, but something clearer, like she had just found a reason to demand something. "You know I'm struggling. You can't just pretend you don't see that." I stood there, silent for a few seconds, not because I had nothing to say, but because I was trying to understand, is this really what they think? Not a rhetorical question, a real one. Because a part of me, it still wasn't ready to believe it had gone this far. But then they kept going. Not one person, all of them. Numbers were mentioned, plans were suggested, fair ways to share were laid out like I wasn't even standing there. Like everything I was could be reduced to a number on a screen. And in that moment, something inside me broke. Not an explosion of anger. Not the kind where you yell, slam the table, or lose control. Here's the full English translation, keeping the emotional depth, pacing, and natural storytelling flow intact. But it was a cold kind of clarity that everything I had held onto for all those years no longer had any reason to be held onto. You owe us. That sentence echoed in my head. I looked at them. For the first time, I looked straight at them, without avoiding, without shrinking myself. "Oh, you what?" The room went silent, not because they didn't hear me, but because they didn't expect me to ask back. "All those years," my mother said, her voice firmer now. "We raised you, gave you a home." I nodded slightly, not in agreement, just acknowledging. Then I spoke, not loudly, not trembling. Just for the first time, I didn't hold back anymore. And in return, I was sent away every time I sneezed. No one said anything. I learned to stay quiet so I wouldn't be a problem. I learned to do everything on my own because no one was there. My voice stayed steady, but I could feel it, each word pulling along the years I had tried to forget. "I stood on stages and didn't see any of you there." Rachel turned away. My father clenched his hand. My mother stopped looking at me, but I didn't stop. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I had been silent for too long. And now you look at that number and say, "I owe you?" I pointed at the screen. "I don't owe this money. I don't owe this success. I built everything step by step on my own." The atmosphere in the room shifted. It wasn't their pressure anymore. It was a heavy silence. I could see it on their faces, not agreement, not understanding. But for the first time, they didn't know what to say. And in that moment, I realized something: family, when distorted long enough, can turn into a kind of obligation. Something that can be calculated, something that can be demanded. But I was no longer the person who would accept that. I already helped. I said it quietly. "The money every month. Where do you think it came from?" My mother looked up. My father frowned. Rachel looked at me for the first time. Not like someone who could take something from me, but like someone trying to understand what just happened. "I didn't need you to know, because I didn't do it to be thanked." I paused. "But don't say I owe you." The room fell silent again. No more demands, no more plans to divide the money. Just one thing left: the truth. And this time, I wasn't the one silently enduring it anymore. I was the one speaking it. And when I was the one speaking the truth, I understood something very clearly. Speaking wasn't enough. If I truly wanted things to change, I had to do what I had always avoided: set boundaries. Not fake ones, but clear ones, impossible to misunderstand. That night, I didn't stay. I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain so they would understand. I left that house not in an explosive anger, but in a strange state, calm to the point of cold. But the next morning, everything began: messages, calls, words filled with blame and pressure. You're overreacting. Family shouldn't be like this. You've changed. I read every message. I didn't respond right away. I didn't react emotionally. Because this time, I refused to be pulled back into the same cycle, the one where I always had to explain, prove, apologize for things that were never my fault. I opened my laptop not to look at the numbers, but to do something I had never imagined I would do. I stopped sending money. No long explanation. No announcement. Just a clear action. The monthly transfers ended. And the reaction came immediately faster, stronger. Are you abandoning your family? After everything we've done for you? This time I didn't stay silent, but I didn't argue either. I replied with just one sentence. I helped because I wanted to, not because I owed you. Nothing more. Because there are things you cannot make people understand if they don't want to understand. And boundaries don't need agreement, they just need to be held. A few days later, they showed up at my office, unannounced. No appointment, standing in the reception area, talking to my staff as if they belonged there, as if they had a right. For a brief moment, I felt pain, not because they came, but because a part of me had once hoped things could be different. But that feeling passed quickly. I walked out not fast, not slow, just for the first time, stepping into a moment like that without hesitation. They're my family, I told my staff calm, but they don't have an appointment. Then I turned to them, looked straight ahead, and they don't have the right to be here. No one spoke for a few seconds. I saw the surprise on their faces not because of what I said, but how I said it. No apology, no explanation, just truth. Are you throwing us out? My mother asked. I looked at her without avoiding. I'm protecting my work. No raised voice, no shaking. Just for the first time, I didn't shrink myself to make them more comfortable. They didn't leave immediately. There were more words, more accusations. But this time, it had no effect because I was no longer in the same position. After that day, I contacted a lawyer. Not because I wanted to escalate things, but because I understood something. Boundaries that aren't protected with clear action will always be tested. I did everything necessary documents, authority, things I once thought I would never need when it came to family. But this was no longer about family, this was about me and my right to protect the life I had built. It didn't mean it didn't hurt. There were nights I sat alone and felt the emptiness this decision left behind. Not because I was wrong, but because I had once hoped for something different. But this time, that pain didn't pull me back. It reminded me of something else. Growing up isn't when you stop feeling pain, it's when you keep moving, even when you feel it. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just strong, I was in control. And when everything settled, I realized my life didn't change in a loud way. There was no clear victory moment, no one standing there acknowledging what I had overcome. Just a normal morning, I woke up, and for the first time, there was no feeling of being pulled back by anything behind me. No messages that kept me thinking for hours. No words that made me question myself. Just quiet. A kind of quiet I had never truly understood before. I started working, meeting people, making decisions without asking what would they think. And at first that felt strange. But then it became lighter day by day. I no longer had to prove my worth, no longer had to hold back my feelings to please anyone. I simply lived the way I chose. There were moments I still thought of them, not with anger, but with distance, light. Like they were a part of my life, but no longer something that defined me. And I think that's what freedom really is. Not living, but no longer being held back, no longer being controlled, no longer shrinking yourself just to survive. I didn't become perfect. I still had moments of doubt, moments of weakness. But this time I didn't go back. I kept moving forward, slowly but steadily. And when I look back now, I don't see someone trying to escape anymore. I see someone who has finally arrived where she belongs. This story is shared to offer a personal perspective and experience and does not represent all families or situations. Everyone's story is different, so take this with reflection and understanding. If you've stayed with the story until the end, I want to ask you something honestly. If you were in my position, would you keep giving or would you stop to protect yourself? Leave your original thoughts, your perspective, your psychological analysis, because sometimes the way you see this story reflects your own experience. If this story made you rethink boundaries, family, or your own self worth, consider subscribing. Here, we don't just tell stories, we try to understand people, emotions, and the things many choose to stay silent about. Thank you for staying until the end. See you in the next story.